Hi, I'm Ben Pindar, I'm the PR account manager at Stag Media, and welcome to another edition of Agri Marketing Mastery. This week, what we're looking at really is the importance of speaking your customer's language. And this isn't just about whether they're in France or Spain or the UAE or whatever and speaking a different foreign language. This is actually about speaking the language your customers use and helping to resonate and understand with them. So we're going to go through a quick few tips just for you to consider as you're starting to put your marketing materials together and why it's important. So really, speaking your customer's language, this is possibly the most important in agriculture because it is such a unique audience. So you really have got to understand who your customers are and be able to communicate with them in a language they're going to understand and trust. And trust is a really key element that we'll come back to. So working our way through the tips, the first thing is make it personal. And it may sound a bit obvious, and in the B2C world, you'll see the big brands, they're really good at crafting really personal messages. They know who you are, know what your pain points are, they know what's going to push you to buy. But what you tend to find in the B2B world, when businesses are trying to communicate with businesses, and it's very typical of agriculture, they don't necessarily see the individual. They're not necessarily talking to the farmer, and there's probably this standard stereotypical image of the grumpy farmer. What they're actually doing is talking to the farm business, and it's not personal. It's very stats driven. It's looking at the key challenges around the industry. It's not speaking directly to the person who's running the farm. And ultimately, while a farm is a business, the person is the one you need to be speaking to because they're the one that are going to make the decision. So how do you do that? One of the key elements is to start by creating a persona. And this is exactly what I've said the big B2C brands do, and they do it exceptionally well. You'll have seen the targeted advertising you get through your social media feeds and things, and that's because the B2C guys have gone to the trouble of understanding who all their individual customers are and how to get in touch with them and speak their language. So in farming, obviously there's a big diverse audience. It's not just our grumpy farmer. There's going to be the latest students are coming through really big in the regen ag. They're really keen on different areas. It might be down to the type of farming they're doing. The arable farmer in East Anglia is going to speak a completely different language to the livestock farmer up in Cumbria, for example. If we take the grumpy farmer, just an idea of a persona, this was styled on our MD, Nick Glaves. And as you can see, so if we take Nick, he's a little bit grumpy, he's mid-40s, going on 70. He doesn't like any nonsense. He avoids topical or modern culture like the plague. So once we start to understand who this is, we know how we've got to communicate with him. If we're going to go in and do something really fluffy and flowery and exciting and try and build lots of generate and excitement and talk a lot around the subject, he's going to shut off completely because he's grumpy. He wants to know what it does for him straight away. If not, he's going to move on. So what that means is we've got our grumpy MD persona. And so we know now we need to speak his language. So it's got to be short, to the point, straightforward, no nonsense, straight talking. The minute you stray from that path, he's going to switch off. And this is really what we're talking about. So think about who you're speaking to and make sure what you're doing is actually resonating directly with them. It goes back to making it personal. There's a person making the buying decision. Are you speaking to them? So talking of speaking to them, that's possibly the most important rule. Actually go out and talk to your customers, talk to the farmers. There's far too many businesses who are too far removed. So you've got people maybe in your marketing departments that are part of a larger organisation. They're never actually getting out there and speaking to the farmers. Your salespeople are a great channel for this. So get the salespeople to talk to the farmers, ask them the questions, understand the language they're using, what they're saying, what their interests are, etc., etc. Feed that back to the marketing teams and use that to start to create the personas. So it's really, really important, this, because it's all too easy. We're going to come to some of the jargon and stuff. You get very much into the corporate mindset. You're writing very dry language that's going to a business rather than a person. And this is why I say get out, speak to the farmers, get on the ground, understand it, get to the shows. They're a really good opportunity. It's something I try and do as much as possible. When I go to the events, I try and sit down, talk to the farmers, have a coffee or a beer with them, understand what language they're using, what they're, where they're reading. A lot of them I'm asking which social media channels they're looking at. I want to know where they're looking for their insights, their information, what language are they using, how they like to digest that. And all of this is telling me who they are and how we can reach them. Number 4, and this is hopefully going to come from talking to them, is the pain. You've got to understand the pain of the person, because that's the fastest way to speak their language. If you understand their problems, their challenges, the things they're really struggling to overcome, the minute you start to make it personal, you can go directly to, we know you're suffering with this issue, this is what you need to do to solve it, and this is where you start to push your product. This is very much about the language of your customer. It's understanding what their pain is and how to do it. Number 5, drop the jargon. And this is a massive bugbear of mine, is that, and there's far too many big organisations that do this, where they've got very much a corporate culture. It's a side effect of becoming successful to a degree, but you cannot use that corporate culture within your personal communications, your sales communications, your marketing materials to that individual farmer. There's things like acronyms, they just get littered all over corporate copy, and it's a really bad habit to have because they're just impenetrable, are acronyms. So drop the acronyms, make it sound like people are there. I'll put quotes in here because that's probably the worst place you'll see corporate jargon. All too often you'll see a quote in a case study or a press release or even in some marketing materials, and it'll be littered with it was our fine fiscal year for us, we expect the results to be highly profitable and it's going to be big results for our end user in a vertical climate, whatever it is. It's all nonsense. It never sounds like someone's actually saying it, and this is a really important thing to remember. Whenever you're using quotes, particularly if you're using a quote from a farmer to try and reinforce your message, make it sound like someone actually said it. Actually use their language, their inflections, whatever it is. Make sure it actually sounds like a real person, because then you're starting to speak the language again and it makes it feel much more personal. It starts to build up a rapport and it starts to build a bit of trust. The one thing to look at for this is if you look at some of the really big agricultural brands, they've got very good at speaking to the farmer, and the majority of what they do is actually talking about how they can overcome their problems. It might even not be pushing one of their own solutions. They're just going out there and saying, we understand the challenges you face. This is something we've seen. We worked with another organisation that did this and that helped to overcome it. They're really generous with their insights. They share their experiences, and all the time they're talking to this individual. They're not talking to the larger industry, to the larger business. It's all getting drilled down to that individual farmer. So think very carefully how all of your comms, your marketing materials are speaking to that person, not to a larger piece as a whole. Number 6, regionalise. I did touch on foreign language. If you're going out to other markets where English isn't the primary language, then you do need to translate it. And we have done some other videos on that, so look into those. But when I'm talking about regionalise, I'm talking again about that massive arable farmer in East Anglia and the little livestock farmer in Cumbria. They are very, very different organisations. So you need to think very carefully. If you're trying to do a general blast to the entire agricultural community, I think there's 106,000 farms across the UK. So it's a big audience and it's very diverse. You've got to think very carefully about how you pitch these personalised messages, because they are very different people. If you've got the opportunity and the resources to do it, regionalise it, because it's going to be far more, it will resonate far more with that individual farmer. So think very carefully about how you're pitching your content, what language you're using. Is it going to be relevant to Grumpy Nick up in Cumbria as much as it is to the East Anglian farmer that's got thousands of hectares, massive bits of kit and things like that? So think very carefully about how you're going to regionalise that, where your customer is, going back to those personas and understanding it. And the final thing, number 7, if you're doing all of this right, it's starting to build trust. The reason you make the language personal and relate directly to this is because you're building relationships. So by using their language, you're starting to build a rapport and understanding with the customer. And the more you do that, the more they'll feel connected to you, the more they'll trust you. And more often than not, they've probably got a feeling for who you are and a trust in you before they've even met you, before they've even started to think about that buying journey. So this is why it's so important. Make sure everything you're doing is focused on that individual. Really drill down into their language, understand it, and make sure you're incorporating it into everything you do. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's a quick run through of making it, make sure you're using the language your customers are using. Any questions, as always, drop me a line and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.